Begin Self-Publishing, episode number 79. What do all these marketing buzzwords mean?
Interested in self-publishing but don't know where to start? Want to get your book onto Amazon? Want to hold your paperback book in your hands? Learn how on the Begin Self-Publishing podcast with your host, Tim Lewis.
When I was editing the last episode with Stu Hynek, it did suddenly occur to me that I have been a little bit blasé when it comes to using some marketing terms, such as return on investment and conversion rate, some of the previous episodes, without really explaining what they mean. I'm not myself from a marketing background. However, though, I have had quite a lot of exposure to accounting and various other business terms over the years. So even though terms like return on investment make perfect sense to me, they may not make any sense to you at all. Or you might have only a hazy notion of what they actually mean. What's interesting is that while I was writing the blog post that goes with this show, usually the case is that if I do a solo show like this one, then I write the blog post first and then record the show later on, using the blog post as an inspiration for what appears in the show. But what I started explaining in the blog post turned into much more of a fundamental understanding of what these terms mean. By just explaining them helped me to understand maybe the power of thinking in this way. So anyway, I'll start with my original intent in explaining what some of these terms mean. I'm going to take you through 3 common marketing terminology terms, even though I suppose return on investment is much more of an accounting idea. So it'll be, what does return on investment mean? What is a conversion rate? And what is a marketing funnel? You might sometimes hear it as a sales funnel as well. So if we start off with return on investment, this is actually something that is named quite well. It is very much the return you get on an investment. It's often known as ROI. So if you ever go to a marketing conference or any kind of internet business conference, often hear about people talking about ROI on an investment. Generally speaking, the bigger is better when it comes to ROI. The way this is expressed is a percentage of extra revenue that you'll get when you invest in something. So, for example, let's say we managed a BookBub deal for our book for, say, like $400. Then, to get a positive ROI, we would have to earn back more than $400 in revenue. So this would actually be the revenue from royalties. So if our book was $9.99, then we'd have to sell 100 of them to get about $700 in royalties. And if you took 700 away from 400, you'd see that that's about 75% rate of return. So for every dollar that we put into this BookBub investment, we would get 75 cents back as extra return. Now, of course, you can have a negative return on investment. So if I paid for a BookBub ad and I didn't sell any books whatsoever, then I'd have on mine as 100% return on investment. Now, one thing to notice is that in the real world, things like this BookBub deal, the actual return on investment is very hard to actually say with any certainty what it is. So we come back to this BookBub example. Say we sold 100 books and at 70% royalty, they're $9.99 books. So it's about $700 that we've earned in that week after we've done this BookBub ad. But what we don't know is how many of those sales are actually attributable to the BookBub promotion and how many are just to do with the fact that we say we met somebody nice at a cocktail party and they decided to buy our book. Or maybe there's some Snapchat superstar who's mentioned our book on their Snapchat story and all their fans have rushed out and bought the book. Now, obviously, the situation is different if we're selling the books direct. We can see things like where the people are coming from in terms of referrals. But the great issue is that if we're selling through a platform through Amazon, apart from trying to use things like affiliate codes to try and understand exactly where people have come from, it's very hard to actually know or attribute where sales are coming from. So if we suddenly discover that there's this hipster on Snapchat who's got 100 fans and he's put out a book recommendation and half of them have bought our book, then that book promotion may have only resulted in say $350 worth of return. So we've actually got a negative return on the BookBub investment that we made. So you see, just by a few bits of information, suddenly what appears to be a good investment can be a really bad investment. And it's just by attributing where this activity is coming from. The other great issue is that this may actually be underestimating the return on investment of that BookBub ad. Because we're saying within the week of the BookBub deal, we're going to look for a return on investment. But there might be some people who are on a holiday and they see the BookBub advert, but then they're not in a position to actually buy the books yet. So they make a note of it, and when they come back from their month-long holiday going around the world, they buy our book. Now that may be attributed to our BookBub ad, but we won't have counted it because it's outside that week where we've arbitrarily chosen to look at the investment. And of course, it may be the situation that there can be multiple reasons why somebody buys something. They may have seen the BookBub advert, but then run into us later and been so impressed with us that they bought the book. So the BookBub ad itself wasn't enough to push them over the line to get them to buy our book, but meeting us was. But it may be the case that just meeting us on our own wouldn't have been enough to make them buy the book. So how do you work out where that return goes? For this reason, it's a much more nebulous concept than it seems to be a lot of the time, return on investment, as are an awful lot of accounting and other financial numbers. A lot of accountants would like to tell you that these figures are all just definite mathematical things, but an awful lot is left open to interpretation, especially when it comes to things like investments and profits. A lot of very poor quality marketers will hide behind the fact that for a lot of things it's very hard to determine a correct return on investment. For things that are done online via links, it's very easy to have very good estimates if you use things like Google Analytics and tracking to try and work out where your actual traffic is coming from. And I don't think we should ever give up on trying to measure things, but just be aware that you're not ever going to get an accurate number. Ironically, in the case with last week's show, Stu could use adequate return on investment numbers because he was just aiming at one person for one thing. So in that case, you could actually calculate return on investment. But because we're trying to sell multiple products to multiple people, it actually becomes a lot harder to actually work out return on investment from particular items for the book world. Another concept that I'm sure I've talked about before is this idea of funnels and conversion rates. Now, I had never heard of funnels or conversion rates until I started to get into book marketing. The idea of a funnel is that, generally speaking, people don't go directly from suddenly discovering about your book to just buying it. There's usually a journey that they go along. And this journey will be a series of steps that people will make with your brand, and some people will fall along the wayside. So let's say you've got 1,000 people who you've sent a website advert to. It may be of those 1,000 people, only 10 people will click on the advert. The other 990 people have fallen by the wayside. Of those people who click the ad, only one person actually buys the book. So you've basically got this idea of a wide part of the top of the funnel, which is the people who've seen your website ad, and it narrows down as people click on the ad, and it narrows down right to the end at the people who actually buy the product, i.e. your book. Now, what the conversion rate is the ratio of people along those steps. So, if only 10 out of 1,000 people click on the ad, then you can say you've got a 1% conversion rate. And that would be what's called the click-through rate on a lot of the advertising platforms. Our total conversion rate for the whole funnel, so to speak, is 0.1%, because only 1 in 1,000 people have bought our book from this website ad that we've run. So kind of the conceptual idea is that funnel is where we've got a lot of potential customers, and these could just be any old body, really. We push them into some sort of process, and along the way, people drop out. And people drop out for all sorts of reasons. So, for example, of this funnel where we've got a website ad, if we had really poor language, or it wasn't clear what our book was about, then a lot of people aren't going to click on the ad because it's not relevant to them. So we get a very low conversion rate because of poor information in the ad, or it might be on the wrong sort of blog site that we've. If we've got a book about science fiction and we advertise on a knitting site, then we're probably going to get a lot less conversion than we would if it was on a science fiction blogging site. So the conversion rate is a way of measuring the effectiveness of a funnel, so to speak. Obviously, if you found some very cheap source of, say, website traffic, so if there was a website where you could, for 1 cent, you could get 1,000 people to look at your ad, and then say 10 clicked on it and 1 bought the book, then in effect you could buy a customer for your book for 1 cent, and you could just keep doing that forever and you'd make huge amounts of money. So even with a very ineffective funnel, people can still make a lot of money if they can find some way of feeding people into the top end of the funnel very cheaply. And this is the revelation that I was talking about in my mind when I was writing the article. A lot of new online and other platforms are often talking about these situations where they found some cheap way to get a lot of people to enter a funnel. If there's some new cheap advertising platform out there, or some great new social media network where there's only 10 people on it who are actually posting stuff, and say 200,000 people are looking at everything that comes on. I'm not thinking about sites like Snapchat or anything when I'm saying this, obviously. But if you've got a new popular platform, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a paid one, it's just somewhere where you can get a lot of customers very cheaply, then the actual quality of your funnel doesn't matter as much as if you're in a competitive market where it costs a lot of money to get people to actually even take that first step and hear about your book. Now, of course, something that you'll hear people talking about is rather than having a funnel towards the purchase itself, an awful lot of book writers have got a funnel towards a sign up on an email list. Now, the reason why they do this, and the reason why I try and get email address for this podcast, is that you often find that you get much, much better conversion rates if you're just trying to get hold of an email, especially if you're giving away what's known as a lead magnet. So that's an item where you'll say giving away a short story or maybe the first book in a series in return for people giving them your email address. So let's say if we go back to this website ad example, if we change the advert so that it's actually advertising this free short story, then we might get a much better conversion rate. So we'll get like 100 people to click on the ad, because everybody's interested in free stuff, right? And let's say half of those sign up to your email list. Then, well, that is, by the looks of things, a much better conversion rate. Of course, the issue is that nobody's actually bought anything yet. So we still need to know how many people, once they're emailed from that email list, actually do buy. And again, we get into the same issues that we had with return on investment here. As in, if 50 people sign up to our email list, but nobody ever buys a book in the first month, is that a worse funnel than the previous one? If then the month later, when we email again, 3 people buy the book. Again, there's a timing issue with these things. But generally speaking, most authors tend to have more effective efforts getting email sign-ups than they do in terms of actual book sales. Especially if you send them through a very good email list, it gives you many more chances to make the connection with people. And it's much less of an ask to ask for an email address than to ask people to actually pay for something. So we go back to the example and say 50 people have signed up for the email list. And from that, we get 3 book purchases rather than 1. So you can see, even by adding in this extra stage, we may have got a better converting funnel. It's a longer funnel than the previous one, as we've got an extra step in it. But the conversion rate of the whole funnel is now 0.3% rather than 0.1%. The great advantage to having something like an email sign up is that you can keep sending emails to this list of people over and over again. And you may only get like 1 or 2 extra purchases over time. But you've got a lot warmer audience. So what I mean by warm and cold is that cold customers are people who have never seen or heard of you before. And that's what you would get from, say, this website ad. They're just random people who happen to be looking at whatever site you're advertising on. If you've got people who have seen one of your adverts before or been to your website before, or even better have signed up for your email, then they already know you and they're much more likely to buy from you than somebody who is completely new. So by having these intermediate steps, where you've got an email sign up, you've got people you can address again, either by emailing them again, or for website traffic, you can actually use remarketing, which is, I've discussed in previous shows, is where you send adverts to people who've already visited your website. By using those options, you can push up your conversion rates as a whole, because you're trying again to get some of the people who dropped out of your funnel at earlier points to buy. Now, of course, we've got the same sort of measurement issues that we have for the other figures. If we're selling books direct from our own website, we can work out all of these numbers purely from Google Analytics figures. But the issue is that if we're sending people to Amazon, then the figures can be a lot more unreliable. We can use things like affiliate tracking codes. So you can say in Amazon that if it comes from a particular link, you can put a special code on the affiliate link. But even so, those aren't 100% accurate. Now, as I mentioned earlier, that the thing that came into my mind when I was writing the article was that as authors or other online business people, I think too many of us become focused to try to push in people at the top of this whatever funnel we're trying to run. And an awful lot of the time it is as simple as people running, say, a BookBub advert. And if you've got something like a BookBub advert, then you're almost outsourcing the entire funnel to somebody else. You've got no way really of seeing where the conversion is in that process. Because it's BookBub that are doing it for you, basically. So you're paying for BookBub to use their pre-existing enormous funnel. They've got thousands of people signed up to their existing email lists. They send out an advert for your book, and it goes through to Amazon, and that's the way it works. And you hope that you earn back more than what you actually paid in. But if you're doing your own work, sending them to your own website, trying to get them to sign up to your own email list, then you own that funnel, even though chances are it will be way less efficient than the BookBub one, because they've got the advantage of economies of scale. But you've then got, say, an email list that you've built up from your own promotion, that you can send emails to again. You've also got the retargeting option of retargeting people who visited your website. So you can kind of try and re-enter the funnel again in a different point. Now, of course, there are situations where you should still use services like BookBub. Because if you add email sign-up things to the back of your books, then you can hope to get a few of them off the back of your actual BookBub sales. And similarly, people are giving away free books with the idea of getting email sign-ups. In effect, they're using the free book as a top of the funnel. So you could pay for advertising for your free book and then get email sign-ups off the back of your free books and then use those email sign-ups to push sales in the later books in the series. Similarly, what people are starting to do now is to create, say, blog posts that are relevant to the people who want to buy your book, and then push people onto things like free giveaways, and then onto your email list, and maybe a long series of emails before you actually ask people to buy your book. The less friction you put between every stage of this long journey that people do to go onto your book, the better. It's all got a bit more complicated and technical and philosophical than I first intended this show. To recap on what these terms mean, return on investment is how much return you'll get from, say, an ad or something that you spend money on. A marketing funnel is basically a way of representing the journey of your reader or customer from being somebody who has no idea who you are to being a happy purchaser of your book. And on that journey, there will be many people who end up not as a happy customer. That ratio of people who bought your book as compared to the people who originally could have been your customers is your conversion rate. And obviously you can have different conversion rates all down the line of your marketing funnel, which is that journey. You don't necessarily have to worry too much about all the terminology. Probably best is just to understand that there is this concept of a journey that the customer makes. And often you can, rather than trying to worry about finding as many customers as possible, you're often better to try and make sure that along that journey, you're losing as few people as possible. And this can be things like, if you're running an advertising campaign, comparing and testing different forms of the advert to see which ones you lose less people on, which have a better conversion rate. And similarly with your email sign-ups. If you've got a huge email list but nobody ever buys your book when you advertise a new one, you might want to look at if there's anything that you're doing wrong in the way that you're promoting your book. It could be that you just happen to get an email, a lot of people signing up to your email who have no interest in your books whatsoever. But it could be that you've made a mistake and put the wrong link onto your email or something along those lines. And by pushing up all of those conversion rates, you can actually make a lot more money with exactly the same number of people coming into your customer journey in the first place. So you'll be spending exactly the same on your website ad, for example, but you'll actually be earning considerably more money from the same advertising spend. And it may not be spending in terms of advertising, it may be time in terms of posting on a social media network. However you acquire your customers, the better you are at taking those potential customers and making them actual customers, the better you'll be. So, while the actual terminology of conversion rate may be a bit esoteric and off-putting, trying to improve that ratio should be something that you would want to consider doing, because it could turn you from being somebody with very few sales into somebody suddenly with quite a few sales, even though you're appealing to exactly the same number of people. Well, hopefully that overly technical explanation has at least got you thinking about things like conversion rates and funnels. So I shall talk to you guys next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please stop by iTunes and rate and leave a review. This helps make the show more visible. For free resources, show notes, and other helpful content, join the community at beginselfpublishing.com.